Well, I think my daughter is probably the best person to be a dyslexia advocate because she now feels badly if people don't have dyslexia because she thinks it's so cool and she is so proud. It's the first thing that she'll tell you about herself, which, makes my heart sing that she's so proud of having this diagnosis. But I think she uses it as her superpower.
I'm Nicole Holcomb, attorney by day and podcaster by night, a former educator, school counselor, and administrator, and mom to a 9-year-old daughter with dyslexia, who loves all things Harry Potter, Minecraft, and science. A few years ago, she was identified with dyslexia, and our life seemed to turn upside down for a while, quite literally. I created the Dyslexia Mom Life podcast to help you navigate the upside down journey of dyslexia. You got this. If you're wanting to thrive as a mom in this dyslexia journey, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Mother's Day may be celebrated one day of the year, but here on the Dyslexia Mom Life podcast, we are celebrating moms for the entire month of May. Today, I'm talking to one of the 8 amazing warrior moms who are sharing their personal parenting dyslexia journey with us. Grab your earbuds and enjoy learning from moms who are taking you behind the scenes of parenting dyslexic kiddos. All right, welcome to the podcast. Today we have Nancy Deane with us, and she is part of our very special Mother's Day series that we're doing for the month of May. And I just couldn't be more excited to talk to Nancy today and share our conversation with you. And so welcome to the podcast, Nancy.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for, setting aside some time to be on the podcast. I couldn't be more excited to have you as part of this conversation and sharing some background and information about your dyslexia mom journey. So thank you for that. Before we get started, though, do you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about your family so people get to know you a little bit before we talk a little bit more about your journey?
Sure. I am Nancy Deane. I am a mother of boy-girl twins. They are about to turn 10, and I'm currently living in Palm Springs, California. We moved here to escape the pandemic from New York City. We thought we'd be here for 2 weeks, and 1 year later, we're still here. So that's where I am physically.
There could be worse places to be, though, right? I mean,
yeah, I don't have a lot of complaints.
I know, right?
We definitely miss our friends.
But, I bet. Yeah, it's beautiful there. Yeah,
a nice place to be. And I am a freelance writer and editor.
All right. Thank you for giving that background and that little bit of information. So before we kind of dive into the interview, let's start off with, you said you have a boy girl twins, which is so funny because I interviewed someone this morning and they had twins too, and it was a boy girl. Isn't that funny?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I think their twins are 11 and a half. And so when you said twins, I was like, whoa, what is the odds of me interviewing 2 people on the same day with twins? That's crazy.
We'll have to compare notes.
I know, right? I'd have to get y'all in touch with each other. That would be great.
Yeah.
So with your twins, are both dyslexic? Is one dyslexic? Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So my daughter is the one who was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADD. And my son is ADHD with a tinge of dyslexia. I think it might actually not quite be, but our daughter really is the one that has issues with the dyslexia that we're focused on. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take that back then for a second and talk a little bit about that. So part of what I'm excited about doing for the month of May is really sharing your journey as a mom and then talking about just the signs of dyslexia and kind of your journey through those pieces, because so many people come into the journey and just really don't know what to expect and really don't know, some people stumble on the podcast because they want to learn more about why their child is struggling and they haven't been evaluated yet. They're just trying to figure this thing out. Or maybe they're listening because their child was recently diagnosed or identified and they're like, I'm not making sense out of all this. So I just really think the stories that we tell will really help moms to learn more about their journey, but also just kind of, personalize it some. So I appreciate you doing that as well. So let's talk a little bit about, take a couple steps back, and let's talk a little bit about early on with your daughter, and what were some of the signs that now you probably realize, right? What were some of the signs that you saw early on that you had a pause or aha moment to think something just is not making sense here? Something just doesn't feel right. Can you share a little bit about those early signs when you were seeing those prior to identification?
Absolutely. I feel like I may have a different sort of take on things because I am a twin mom, and my son is, they're both extremely bright, but my son is very into facts and figures, and he just is a sponge and absorbing information. Whereas my daughter is more of the carefree, creative, visual one in the family. And so from a very young age, we used to live in New York City, like I said, my son would be the first to identify the elevator buttons or push the, going to our floor, push the button, etc., and not really give my daughter a chance to do that. And so if I were to ask them to identify a letter, then he would be the first to call out. It was more his personality, where she was more interested in coloring and drawing. And so I knew that she wasn't as quick to identify letters and numbers from a very early age, but I just figured it was something to do with the dynamic between the two of them. And that continued throughout preschool, and they were originally in the same class, but as they progressed through preschool, I ended up putting them in two separate classes so that she could really have time without her brother answering for her. And we found that she was still struggling to identify really, basic words like cat and sat and all of those things. And so I had an inkling that something was perhaps amiss from quite an early age, but I figured she was maybe just a little behind because my twins were born very prematurely at 29 weeks. And so sometimes those milestones do end up coming a little later for those preemie kids. So we proceeded with going to a private kindergarten, which I thought would be beneficial to them to have smaller classrooms from what our public school that we were zoned for in New York City had. But I think that's a really great lesson for moms who are trying to figure out what to do for school, because that turned out to be both a blessing and a curse, because it was pretty academic and she wasn't able to keep up in kindergarten. And that was what led us to having her evaluated. Whereas I think if she were probably in a larger classroom, maybe with not as much being demanded of her, we may not have known that something was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a similar experience as well. Our daughter was in pre-K in a private school due to some speech articulation concerns. And then going into kindergarten, first grade, we started really seeing things. And it's funny you say that, because I remember back thinking, oh, well, she's in a class with less than 10 kids. I'm thinking I'm providing a benefit, and then I realized, okay, so now I've made her stick out even more because she's the one kid that, or at the time it felt like that anyway. Now we know, years later, we know there are other kids in the class that end up being dyslexic. But at that time, she's feeling it and I'm feeling it. And I'm thinking, wow. So I put her in this environment thinking that it would be better, but it actually ended up making her stick out more. However, I also know if she had been in the public school, like you were saying, there's so many kids that when would we have known, So I absolutely can relate to that piece of your story as well.
Absolutely. So at a very early age, at the age of 6, we had her evaluated with doing a neuropsych on the recommendation of the principal of the school. And I'm so grateful for that, because although it was still quite early to diagnose her with dyslexia, she was showing all of the signs. And so we were able to pretty quickly remediate by having a tutor start working with her after school, which she was responding to beautifully using a Norton-Gillingham approach. And it was that relationship that really helped her overcome a lot of her anxieties and disdain really for learning, because she just wasn't interested in pushing through things that were harder for her. And so she was sort of our fairy godmother, if you will, helping us navigate what best to do next. So what we ended up doing was pulling her from that private school because it was a dual language program. And not only was she struggling in English, she was also struggling in Chinese, which was the other language that she was a part of. And so it was very difficult for her. And so we moved to our local public school, which was fantastic. And we were able to use that neuropsych to get an IEP for her and load her up with additional resources in both reading and math.
And what did those look like? Were those like services, or were those more accommodations to help her? When you say resources, what could you give us an example maybe?
Sure. So our school was able to provide us with both accommodations and services. So unfortunately, they don't have a push-in method, which I think probably would have been great for her. It was more of a pull-out method where she would go a few times a week to the learning specialist and focus on reading and math. I say unfortunately, because although it's wonderful to have that attention in a small group, she was then missing the other things that were happening in her class.
Right.
And so for her, I really found that she was starting to understand her number sense and letter sense and starting to be able to read. But what ended up happening was her confidence and just her self-awareness was really taking a hit. And she was starting to not want to go to school, was very insecure about her abilities, because not only was she behind in reading and math from her peers, but then she didn't really know what was going on in the classes that she was then missing. So she was doubly behind. So we were able to do that for 2 years, just sort of seeing whether she would catch up and how she would respond to the program. And we also increased her private tutoring that happened after school. But it was hard for her because she was doing a full day of school, and then instead of going to ballet or soccer, she was coming home to do reading homework and reading work.
Right.
And so these poor kiddos had to work doubly as hard, as their peers.
Yeah.
And her twins, which is difficult.
Yeah, it is, because they all day long they're doing good just to kind of hold it together and get through the day when they see their peers kind of flying through things, and as they continue to struggle to decode and figure things out. And especially like you said, if they're being pulled out for a different program, then whatever they're missing in class, then they feel like they're behind all the time. And then they get home and have homework to do, but then they've also got tutoring to do, and it's just exhausting for them and for you, right? I mean, it's just so much. It's so much. What I like to call invisible parenting. There's so many things that we're doing behind the scenes that people don't see. Your neighbors don't see, your in-laws don't see, your best friend doesn't see, because there's just so many moving pieces all of the time to that. And so it does become, it could become quite exhausting, and it's a difficult way to balance everything when you're trying to remediate during those years. So it can be very challenging.
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of people, some of her teachers included, were thinking, well, she just needs to work a little harder. And I don't think that these kids that have dyslexia or other learning challenges, they don't need to work harder. They just need to work differently.
Right.
And that's a piece that, some teachers are wonderful with that and they're able to teach them in a different way. But others are really just having to, navigate their own classroom and the needs of the mass number of students that they have. And so we took all of the learnings that we had over the last few years, and then were able to apply her to a specialized school that specifically focuses on learning differences, language-based learning differences. And so it was then that we were able to really see that she needed to be taught in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Now, was that still in New York, or was that when you moved to California?
That was in New York.
In New York.
Yeah. So we were able to have her do third grade and at the specialized school, which it was life-changing for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not only did the tutoring go away and, you know, all those extra homework hours, but she was happy again, and she felt confident, and she was with students that were like her and teachers
Right.
that understood her. And if she needed something repeated again, they would slow down. They would do things for a whole week if they had to, until she really understood the material. And that was so beneficial to her confidence and to just her educational growth.
Right.
Yeah. So the tricky part is that we are in California, and we love that school so much that we've stayed with it. So she's actually doing remote school through the pandemic, starting at 5:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
when you said you
she's
had already
once
had a
again
full
working
day,
really
you
hard.
had already had a full day when we got on the phone. Now I understand.
I've already had a full day. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Every day we start bright and early. So.
Okay. Okay. And then what about her? Is her brother going to school locally or through a different school, I'm assuming?
Her brother is still at their old public school in Tribeca. And so he starts at 5:45. So he has a few more extra minutes to sleep.
Oh my goodness. So you get one started and then the other. Okay, I gotcha. Wow.
Yeah.
The only good news about that is I would imagine that you get done earlier in the afternoon than if you started later, but still that's early.
We do. I mean, it's actually kind of a great schedule because we get to see the sunrise every day. The birds are chirping. And then when they're done, it's noon and we have a full day to explore and go hiking and swimming and all those wonderful things that we can do being out here.
Right. That's great. So with with staying with the school in New York that you're, finding, it sounds like finding some great progress. This would be year 2 for her there, or year 3?
This is year 2.
Year 2.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I know you're kind of in the thick of things right now. It sounds like you've made a lot of progress and made some, I guess detours along the way to different paths to get a little bit better interventions for her and keep kind of ramping that up. And now that you're at a school that you feel like is a good fit and you can really see changes, looking back from the private K to now, what are some differences that you're seeing as far as, being on the path you're currently on, I guess?
I think just her excitement for reading that really took hold at her first year at her school. In the sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, she's really excited to learn. I think one of our favorite moments is seeing her reading a book, walking down the street, on the subway, not looking up at all. She wrote it all the way from Manhattan to Brooklyn. And she's just really a voracious reader now, which is something that I remember our tutor told us in kindergarten, like, you watch, she'll start reading and it'll surprise you. And I thought, there's no way, because she just felt so behind. And so to see it actually come to fruition and to see her love it, and, want to buy the next book and the next one. It was Diary of a Wimpy Kid was the first book that really caught her attention, that she was able to get through on her own. And she plowed through that series. And she tells everyone, I read chapter books. And just seeing her light up like that is so wonderful after everything that she's gone through to try and make that happen.
And how does that make you feel as a mom?
Oh, so proud, so pleased.
Yeah.
I think that each part of our journey, although it has been challenging, I think that we learned a lot through each of those steps, not only in what felt good for us as a family, but what kind of learner she was and what she needed. And I remember being a little paralyzed trying to figure out what would be the best for her. And somebody said to me, whatever you choose, it's not forever. You can always make a change.
Mm-hmm.
And although that can be challenging and cumbersome to navigate, it's so true in what we've found. And also that the kids are way more adaptable than you would imagine. I know a lot of people have said, oh, I wouldn't want to take my child away from their friend group that they're currently in school with to send them to a different school. But you'd be amazed at how they feel so embraced and empowered by going to a school that really understands how they need to learn.
Yes. And too, the educators are all taught the same, because we're in the same situation. Our daughter left a small private school, and she's in she's in a different school. It's an immersion school, and every child's dyslexic, and all the teachers are OG trained, and they have dedicated time during the day for, their reading remediation, and it's just very streamlined. But you're right. I mean, there's just something, I can only imagine walking into a building and feeling that weight lifted off of you because your neighbor sitting next to you. It might not be the same severity, but kids don't get that, right? They're like, okay, it's cool because we all get it. We know it's hard. And then the teachers at her school, work on advocacy, and they work on, what a special gift it is. And I know for moms, I've heard many of them say it's not a gift. Right now in the throes of things, we get that, right? It's difficult. These academic years are so difficult, but there's something to be said when you do find the right fit. And I love what you said a minute ago, because it is, I've not heard anybody say that yet, but it is paralyzing feeling. And you think, gosh, I hope I don't screw them up. Like, I hope I make the right decision. And you're so right that, there's going to be seasons when we might need to do something different. Something may change in their interest, or something may change in the school that they're in. And I think that's a wonderful piece that you shared for people to remember, that you're doing what's best today, but a month from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now, you can always pivot and make a change. And I think if anything came out of the pandemic, it is that we as adults learned to be more flexible, and we had to learn how to look at things differently. And I think that's been, if there's any blessings out of that, it's been that we as adults have had to learn some life lessons along the way too. And the kids have been so resilient through it. It's been amazing.
Absolutely.
So, and how does your daughter respond with it being remote? Do you feel like she's still responding well to that, and the school's doing things that are really, because it's just different, right? Being in person and it's different, but I get that you wanted to keep that continuity because you were seeing such progress.
Yeah. We found that doing remote, she's able to still maintain that relationship and still progress with how she was learning. But I do see that, one of the principals of our school always says that what they do is it's a contact sport. And that really resonates with me, because my daughter especially, and I think most kids that have this profile, are very tactile and visual and creative, and perhaps that's a generalization, but from what I've seen. And so really having that immersive experience where they can use manipulatives, they can, see what their classmates are doing, they can really build upon each other in their learning, I think is invaluable, especially in such a small group, because I think there's only 8 children in her class.
Right.
And I think that it would be best if she were in person, but we're making it work.
Right.
Online.
Absolutely. Yeah. And too, what we were talking about a second ago, it's going to be so interesting to see our kids, or my daughter's 10 as well. It's so interesting to me to think about, the kids that have all lived through COVID and the pandemic and remote learning, and just having to be more, flexible and resilient. It'll be interesting to see as adults, how that differs and how that's impacted their experiences. We don't know that today, but it'll be interesting to see down the road. And two, I mean, even that, like you were saying, just, having to make those hard decisions, because for us, we sold a house, we moved across Atlanta. I had to change a job. The first year I commuted, and it was 3 hours, an hour there, 2 hours home every time across Atlanta. I did that for the whole first year until I could get a job somewhere else. And, she'd been at the same school for, pre-K to kindergarten to first grade. Her friends were there. But I just remember her saying, when we talked to her about it and she shadowed at the school, she said, I am struggling and this will be a good opportunity. I was like, she's in first grade at this point. I'm like, what? This will be a good opportunity. Hello. And so she's been my inspiration because she has been just amazing through the whole journey. She's never once complained about, having to move. She does sometimes say she misses her old neighborhood and things like that. But she said she knew that this is what she needed to do. And she trusted that we were doing what was best for her. And so, but it's hard, it's those major life changes, moving, getting a job, having, trying to meet new people. And then second year we have a pandemic. So it's just, it's a lot, but you're right. I mean, they embrace it and the fact that they're, like I said, they just feel more comfortable there. So it's good when you're able to continue that and continue to see that improvement. Let's shift for a second, still talking about dyslexia and parenting, but let's shift for a second. If you were to say, how would you describe, I mean, you have twins, and I know, every child's different, even twins, but when you think about parenting, I mean, parenting today is so different than when we were growing up. There's so many things, social media, pandemic. I mean, there's all these things that are happening that we didn't experience. And they're just, their life just looks different, right? They really are digital natives. Their whole childhood looks different than ours. But when you think about just parenting in general, but then you think more specifically about parenting a child with dyslexia, I mean, what pieces would you share are challenging? Like, what pieces do you see? And this could be some more of that invisible parenting. What are some things that a mom that's starting this journey needs to hear, that these are going to be some challenging pieces? Not in a negative way, but they are just going to be different challenges when you raise a child with dyslexia.
Sure. I think that one of the biggest challenges is just seeing your children have to work so hard to do basic things like read and read a book and follow along with subtitles or whatever it is that is happening in their daily life. It's challenging to see them struggle. And I think as a parent, you want things to be carefree and easy for them. And so when it's not, I think it's really hard to see your kid have to go through that. I think depending on your child, there's also the emotional toll that it takes on them, being sad at bedtime because they were behind in class, or being nervous to try something new because they fear they won't understand. I think all of those things are really difficult as a parent to navigate. I think that, financially, there's definitely a burden on the family if you are able to seek outside resources. Tutors that specialize in Norton Gillingham are not easy to always find, and B, they often are fairly expensive. I think that they're worth their weight in gold from what I've experienced if you have a good one. But that's not always an option. And it's also not always an option in the town that you live in. I think where we're currently located in Palm Springs, we've found very few resources. And that's been such a stark contrast to what we had available to us in New York City.
Right. Absolutely. So what about on the flip side of that? What are some things that you feel like are really rewarding about raising a child with dyslexia that you might not have known if you didn't have one?
Well, I think my daughter is probably the best person to be a dyslexia advocate, because she now feels badly if people don't have dyslexia, because she thinks it's so cool and she is so proud. It's the first thing that she'll tell you about herself, which makes my heart sing, that she's so proud of having this diagnosis. But I think she uses it as her superpower, and she has worked harder, and it has shown that if she perseveres and puts her mind to something, that she's able to work within limitations to make herself thrive. And I think that that's a huge lesson that she'll take with her throughout her life. And I think I've also mentioned she's insanely creative. She's a beautiful dancer, a wonderful singer, great artist, but she's also really in tune with how she's feeling, which makes her a really great friend. She's extremely empathetic. She is never impatient with people because she knows that sometimes people struggle and they may not be on the same page as she is, and that's okay with her. And just seeing those parts of her personality really blossom has been really wonderful to see. And I don't know if that's just who she is or if it's because of what she's had to navigate at such a young age.
All right. So I want to shift the conversation for a few seconds here, a few minutes. So one of the things I'm always interested to learn more about the guests that I interview, especially for Mother's Day, I think is just something we got to talk about, which is, we give and give and give as moms. That's just what we do. And you've already shared so much about your journey and how, you and your family have had to pivot and have had, y'all have even moved, and there's just been so many things that have taken place along this journey. But what are some pieces that you would say, for example, when I think about moms and all that we give, we sometimes, raise my hand included, or many times we put our needs at the back, right? We'll get to that later, and we don't take as good of care of ourselves as we should. So I say all that to say, can you share with us your favorite self-care practice? What do you enjoy to do? What recharges you? I just think it's so important for moms to have, especially when they're in that paralyzed stage, to think, okay, I got to figure out some way that I can recharge for myself, because we just can't pour from an empty cup. We just have to stop and pause sometimes.
Absolutely. I think that what mothers are having to navigate right now with the pandemic is, it's so much on all of us. And I think that it's really important to take those moments, whether it be being grateful for your cup of coffee in the morning or seeing the sunrise or watching the birds, just having those moments that are part of your daily ritual that you can really pause and reflect how wonderful that feels. I think for me specifically, I really have embraced hiking and being in nature since leaving New York. And that is something that brings me great solace. And I also really love photography. I'm a documenter, and so I'm constantly taking photos, and I'm in a place that's abundantly beautiful. And so I'm really able to kind of remove myself from the current chaos and just sort of slow down and look at things and be inspired by my surroundings in nature and document that.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, one last question. What advice would you give for a mom who's just starting her journey?
Listen to your gut. I think that a lot of people in the beginning, especially when they're little, will say to you, relax, everybody learns to read. It'll just click. That's something that I think all mothers are told. And sometimes it's not clicking. And that you shouldn't just wait for that click to happen if you know in your gut that something else is going on. I think that although it was jarring at the time to have a 6-year-old being told that they're not keeping up, um, on one hand, I thought, well, she's in kindergarten. It's totally
Right.
fine that she's not doing all these things. But on the other hand, I'm grateful to have had that little push to see and dig down if there was something else that was going on, because it allowed us to really identify at such an early age what sort of resources would be most beneficial to her. I think that having other people in your camp that can help support you, every person's journey is so different, and every diagnosis is so different. And so what works for one child may not work for yours. And really trusting your intuition and leaning on those experts to help guide you and make connections to people who can offer further support.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. And I know I will be the first person to tell you Happy Mother's Day, because it's not May yet. So Happy Mother's Day, but it will be when this airs. So I wish you nothing but the best for Mother's Day. And thank you for all that you do for your children and for your community. And it's just, it's a journey we're all navigating, and it's, we're in this for the long haul. And, there's not many days that we get pats on the back or we get a thank you. And so I just, wanted to take the opportunity to use the podcast for even more good, which was, reaching out to moms to let each of you know that you're special, and that, we were chosen to parent these amazing little dyslexic learners, and so it brings a different kind of joy to our life. And I just appreciate you sharing your journey with us and opening up information and sharing your family with us. And I just wish you nothing but the best, and that you have a fantastic Mother's Day.
Thank you so much. The same to you. I'm so grateful to you for having this podcast and for sharing this information, because it's not always easy to find. So this is wonderful that you're building this community of mothers. And I'm always available if somebody wants to DM me on Instagram to offer my advice or help point you in the right direction.
Thank you so much for that. I'll put a link to your social stuff, your social links and things in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out, I'm sure they will. I appreciate you offering that up, because it is always good to have fellow moms to ask a question, especially, we just connect with different people. And so, I appreciate you making that offer as well.
Yeah, thank you. Anytime.
Thank you so much for listening today, and happy Mother's Day to you. You are an amazing warrior mom, and together we can do hard things, right? Are you new to dyslexia? If you are and you're looking for more resources, then go to dyslexiamomlife.com/start here, where I have resources for you from blog articles, other podcast episodes you can listen to, and also free resources. And do you want to connect with our guest this month? Then be sure to go to dyslexiamomlife.com to find each of the episodes listed there from this month, so you can connect with all these amazing moms on our podcast. And we have a special episode that we're going to be releasing on May 31st, so you don't want to miss that. Be sure to subscribe, though, because we are going to be releasing these Mother's Day episodes throughout the month of May. Have a great day, and remember, you got this.